In life, we all encounter obstacles, and those obstacles come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. The question is, how do we handle those obstacles? Do we attack them head on, or do we allow them to make us quit? Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up on themselves, their dreams, or their goals. We will interview successful people from all walks of life as they share their no-quit stories when they had the choice to give up or give in, but they didn't. We thank you for listening, and we hope to be that jolt of positivity as you go for your greatness. Welcome to episode number 151 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is starting over. Our quote of the day comes to us from Frank Sinatra. So take a deep breath, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again. Today's episode is sponsored by the good people over at West Fair Communications, who publish the Westchester County Business Journal and the Fairfield County Business Journal. These newspapers do a wonderful job in covering all aspects of the business world within two of the most influential markets in the New York metropolitan area. You can also take advantage of their daily news feeds, which keep track on the companies and thought leaders in these important regions. For more information, take a look at www.westfaironline.com. Trust me, once you start reading, you won't quit. It is my pleasure to bring you today's episode. Our guest has quite a unique story, as he went from over seven figures to bagging groceries for $7 an hour. From the music world to the real estate world, Matt Theriault has had his share of ups and downs, but he never quit. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Matt, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks, Chris. I'm glad to be here.
I appreciate it. So the first question I ask everybody is, are you ready to make it happen today?
I'm so ready to make it happen.
Good stuff, good stuff. So as we spoke about before we went live, the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. So I was curious if you had either a personal story about no quit or perhaps a challenging time that really tested you and you could have given up and given in, but you didn't.
Boy, do I. So when I got out of the Marine Corps, I spent the next 15 years or so of my life in the music business. I had a small little hip-hop label. We had major label distribution, though, and did really well until hit the age around 33, 34. That was back in, I think, 2000, 2001. And this thing called the digital download came along, and it just changed the way people consumed music. And I resisted it with all of my effort, and I lost that battle. And that it turned the whole music industry pretty much upside down, and it put us out of business rather quickly in about a 6-month period. And I found myself going from a 7-figure year to $7 an hour bagging groceries at the age of 34. So when you ask me to recall a story when I felt like giving up and feel like quitting, this would be it, because that was a moment in my life where I thought I was done. I thought I was over. And for about 6 months, I had the biggest pity party you could imagine. I blamed everybody and everything on my situation until about 6 months after that, I realized, wow, nobody is coming to rescue me. There's no shortage of shoulders to cry on and ears to bend, and everyone's got an encouraging word, but no one's going to do anything for me. And I just realized, wow, if I don't do something about it, I'm going to be at this grocery store for the rest of my life. And so the grocery store manager, who coincidentally was the same age, he had been working there since he was 16 years old, and he was just 2 years away from being able to draw on his pension. And he shared with me along the way how he had been able to acquire a few apartment buildings. And at the age of 36, between the cash flow that he was receiving from his apartment buildings and the portion of the pension that he was going to be able to draw upon, like, he was set. And he said this one thing to me, this one statement, and I've repeated it probably 1,000 times since. He said, Matt, if you want your life back, if you want that money back that you've become accustomed to, it's real estate. And he says, real estate is the final frontier where the average person has a legitimate shot at creating real wealth. And at that moment in my life, I didn't have a plan B. I knew I had to learn something new. I did miss my money. And based on those words, that's the direction that I went in. So today, 12 years, 13, 14 years later, I am a full-time real estate investor.
No, I think it's amazing, and I appreciate you sharing that story with us. But the thing that stands out to me is the fact that after your 6-month pity party, you realized that nobody was going to do it for you. And I think that's something that we often talk about indirectly, probably on every show, is that it comes to a point where you have to make the decision that you're going to do it for yourself. And it doesn't mean that other people don't help you. And obviously that manager clearly discussed with you real estate and the power of that. But the realization is people will give you ideas, they'll give you concepts, they'll give you guidance. But at the end of the day, in the beginning of every single day, you yourself are the only one that can put in the work.
Yep, 100%. And there was a specific day, and I remember it vividly. They were short. It was a busy time in the store. They were short on checkers, and so some of us baggers got to become checkers just to alleviate the busyness of the day. And there was one lady that came through my line, and she was, I don't know, if you were to picture your typical yuppie soccer mom, you can probably get a pretty good visualization of her. And she had the $500 stroller. She had twins in the stroller, so it was double wide. And she was just looked like she came from her tennis lesson, and she had the perfect outfit on. She had the jewelry on, and she was on the phone talking. I was checking her groceries, and when I told her what the total was for her groceries, she just kind of was continuing to talk, and she opened up her wallet and gave me her card. And when she opened up her wallet, her ATM receipt fell out, and I couldn't help but sneak a peek at the balance. And it was $256,000 in her whatever account that was. And that really hit me. It really resonated with me because that was a specific number that had a lot of meaning to me when I was in the music business, because when my account hit that point, it was time for me to make a transfer. And I started thinking about how long it had been since I had seen that balance. And I just realized that, wow, if I continue to do what I'm doing right now, I will never, ever see that balance again. And that was the low point. I had to dismiss myself from work that day. I went out to the car, I put my head on the steering wheel. I cried. I screamed. I asked God for help, give me some direction. And that's where it was like, I got to do it myself. No one's coming to do it for me.
That's an interesting story that stands out, and I appreciate your candor with such a specific story. But I think the coolest part about it is it's something like that stands out for each of us. And it doesn't mean that we're identical and our stories are the same, but the reality is at some point, at some time, we had that realization. And typically it's something visual where you see that balance, or you see somebody accomplish a goal, or you see somebody have something that you want. And the best part about the story is you went out, not that you cried in your car, but the best part is that you realized that and you tied it to a goal. And I think you could have just looked at it and said woulda, coulda, shoulda, but the reality is you decided then and there that you're going to become that person that you used to be. And it's always cool just to hear people's different perspectives of their story, because it's typically something visual that they tie it to. And I think it's really neat that you had that specific thing stand out to you, because it reminded you of the past when you had to make a balance transfer. So it's just really cool how certain things just kind of stick out, and it's not something that you were obviously thinking about that day, but it just came out, and obviously it made you think back about it.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So I wanted to ask you, Matt, if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do today.
Yeah, so I'm a full-time real estate investor. We have three capacities of our business. The company is Epic Real Estate, and we show people how to do what we do now. That started about 8 years ago. We help busy professionals go out and build passive income portfolios with real estate. We do that with them by holding their hand. They're still the boss, but they're able to leverage all of our resources and our labor. And then we have a fund where it's a little bit more for accredited investors who are looking to diversify their portfolio, where they can actually invest in our operation. So that's what we do today. We're not fix and flippers. We're very much cash flow, residual income focused, very conservative investing, very boring investing. I guess most people would say that was what we do, but it's historically proven investing. And so that's what we do today. So we do it for ourselves and we help others do the same.
No, I think that's really neat that you paid forward in that regard and help other people do it. Because I think that's one of the problems for a lot of people that they bump into, I feel, is they know what they want to do. They know what they should do, but they don't really have somebody. So your company sounds really neat, because I don't want to say it's just a set it and forget it, but the reality is people have money and they know what they want to do and should do, but they don't typically have the knowledge of how to do it. So I think your company sounds really interesting for those people that are interested in that. We'll have some of that information in our show notes after as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you, Matt, how do you define success, or what does success mean to you personally?
I think success for me personally is I know I am succeeding when I wake up in the morning and I can report to the office or not. That's probably the most basic definition of success for me is when and that ebbs and flows throughout the year. Like there's certain portions of the year where all the systems are working well, the team is performing well, and my physical presence is not required at the office. And there's other times where, I got to come in and fix stuff. We were kind of talking a little bit about that before we got started recording. That's what success is to me. That's how I know when I'm being successful.
No, I love that question, and that's a question that we've been asking probably for the last 75 or so episodes, and I love it because there is no right or wrong answer, and for everybody it's different, so I appreciate you sharing that. If you had to define yourself in one word, what would that word be?
I think I'm an implementer. Never been asked that question. I've never given it any thought. That was the first word that came to my mind, so that's the one I'm sharing with you.
That's the only one you can go with, and I think we're probably 160 episodes recorded. That's the first time that word's been used, so that's always neat when we get a new word.
Yeah, yeah. I have an idea, and I go try it right away. And some of them work, some of them don't, but more have worked than not, or at least we've gotten results from the ones that worked for that to be a good strategy for myself. And so I just take action. I don't ever want to go back to bagging groceries again. And I know if I cease to take action, I stop implementing. The world has told me, at least in the job world, they've told me that's what I'm worth. So I'm never going back.
No, and I'm sure the ones and the things you've tried that have not worked, that you've definitely learned from them. So I think that's cool that you touched on that. And it's also, like you said, about taking action. So wanted to switch lanes for a second. One of the things we're always looking to do is add value to our listeners. And I was curious if you have either a morning or a daily ritual that you swear by.
I don't. And I know that's really popular these days. What's your morning ritual? I like to wake up at my own speed. I like to get to the gym at my own speed. I like to work out at my own intensity. And that's kind of it. It's coffee. It's there's this new Monster drink. They have a drink kind of competing with Gatorade. It's not the carbonated kind, which I'm in love with. And that's been like my new ritual and what I've been fascinated with probably the last 6 months. Just getting to the gym and get to the office about 11 or 12. And that's kind of where my inspiration starts to flow. And that's where I set into work.
Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you actually do have a morning routine, and that's the coolest part about this question is you've actually answered it the same way where a lot of people said, well, I don't really have one, and they go into it. And so you actually do have a morning routine, and it's done on your own time. And I think that's actually what most people's morning routines are, is they find out what works for them. And maybe you listen to or you talk to other people, but the reality is if I told you to get up at 4 and get in the office by 7, you might try it for a day or two or something, but the reality is what works for you is different for me, and it's very similar to that success question, and I appreciate you sharing it, but you definitely indirectly do have a morning routine.
Yeah, I've heard that question asked before of other people, and I've heard just so many answers that were so structured. I wake up at 6 and I use the restroom, and at 6:30 I go have a cup of coffee, and then I do my daily journal, and then I pontificate and set new goals for the day. And I don't have anything like that, but yeah, because I do have a routine.
Maybe it's also from your marine background in the sense of you didn't want the structure after that, so maybe indirectly you've rebelled.
Yeah, maybe subconsciously, somewhere deep down.
So I was curious if you've read anything recently, or perhaps you're reading something that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
That's good. Yeah, the beginning of this year, I think it was just the end of last year. I was on a long road trip up to see my mom. I was driving from Los Angeles to Oregon, and a book that had been sitting in my Audible account for a very long time that's been recommended to me more than once was Mike Michalowicz, his book Profit First. And that was a life-changing book. I think 3 of my most favorite books have been Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Awaken the Giant Within, and what's the other one? The Slight Edge. And those have just been my 3 staples every time I'm asked about what books to read. That's always been those 3, and that's over the last 15 years. But I would put Profit First. That was probably the biggest groundbreaking book for me that caused serious impact and action in my world, to where I just got in the habit of paying myself first. And so I'm taking a small portion of my profits off the table, putting it in an account that's unreachable, and forcing my business to run off what's left over rather than doing it the opposite way, which is how so many entrepreneurs operate. And that's been life-changing. So Profit First was, I love that book. He's been on my podcast, and we've not become friends, but we do communicate, and that's my choice.
No, I appreciate you sharing those 4 books. And you said something that I wanted to just touch on for a second. One of the main words we talk about, and we use hashtag accountability all the time, we break down the 3 A's of accountability as action, application, and attitude. And speaking of action, you just discussed impact led to action. I wanted to ask you maybe a tougher, challenging question is, why do you think that some people know that they should be taking action? They know that they want to achieve a certain goal and it's going to require a certain amount of action. But why do you feel that so many people, when it comes down to it, they don't actually take that action?
I think it comes down to 2 things, really. It's whatever they're thinking about of taking action within, they don't believe that is going to work. Or the second thing is they don't believe that they are going to work. I think deep down, that's the only 2 reasons people don't take action. Because if there's something that you wanted, and it comes from that very famous personal development question, right? What would you choose to do if you knew you would not fail? And everyone has quick answers for that. Then the question is, well, why don't you do it? Because either they don't believe it's going to work or they don't believe that they are going to work. I think it's really comes all about the belief that they have in the thing that they're pursuing, or the belief in themselves, maybe a combination of both.
It's so cool that you touch on that, because I've heard that question, what would you try or what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail or wouldn't fail? But I haven't heard the follow-up question in that sense. So I think that's really cool that you shared that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're change lanes here for a second to one of my favorite questions. If you could have dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Wow. I've thought about that because, I live in Los Angeles. I'm born and raised here. I see celebrities all the time. It takes a lot to get me starstruck. I think the only 2 people that would really have that kind of impact on me would probably be, and it's random, they have nothing related, I don't think, would be Tiger Woods or Tony Robbins. Those are the 2 people I think I would just love to sit down with. I think Tony Robbins, just watching him work on others in various formats, whether it's been audio or video, and he's a very transformational guy. I see him create amazing breakthroughs for people that just couldn't see it for themselves. And then Tiger Woods, I just think he and I would get along.
I won't go into asking why specifically you and Tiger Woods would get along so well. So we'll just leave it at that.
I started to think about that after I said it. I was like, everyone's gonna be thinking something entirely different.
Hey, but you know what? That's the best part about audio or listening to it is, you can't see our smirks or whatever, but it'll leave something to think about.
Yeah, I guess so. Probably not the thought I wanted to leave, because that's not what I was thinking. But yeah. You all can have your own thoughts. That's fine with me.
No, but I think either of those 2 would be quite an interesting lunch, and I think it's just or dinner. Excuse me. I think they both obviously come from different places, but both unbelievably successful people in different, obviously, spheres. But definitely an interesting dinner. So before we went live, you and I were talking about a cool pilot program that you just launched. I wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just briefly sharing that with our listeners for those that are interested in maybe connecting or getting involved with that.
Sure. Yeah. Since I don't know, 8 years ago when I became an educator or a trainer, I got into that capacity of our business. One of the more common questions that's asked is, if you lost everything and had to start over, how would you do it? And I think that comes from a lot of people that feel like they have nothing and they want what I have, or want to accomplish something similar that I've accomplished, and they want to take off on that. So after being asked that question enough times, I went and created a pilot program where specifically walks people through step by step of exactly how I would do it. And it's pretty much the exact same way that I did do it. And I don't think I would change much if my resources were limited like they were when I got started. And so I put that course together. And if anyone wanted to do it, it's free. You can go to freerealestateinvestingcourse.com. No fancy spellings, no hyphens, no spaces. Just freerealestateinvestingcourse.com.
That is a long, long website, but obviously, like you said, it's no cool spellings and no abbreviations. So definitely would recommend our listeners that are interested not only to check it out, but make sure that they look into it. And we'll put it at the end of our show notes.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chris.
So one of the things, as I mentioned before, we often talk about is the word accountability. I wanted to ask you, what does accountability mean to you?
Cool. Accountability is, and I think that's very closely related to the word integrity by means of saying what you're going to do, declaring what you're going to do, and then doing it for no other reason than you gave your word to it. I would look at accountability very similar to how I look at integrity. Never thought of it that way, but that's what came to mind.
And that's another question that follows the whole success question, because there is no right or wrong answer, but it's always interesting because people touch on different things, and you're the first person that's tied it specifically to integrity, but I think clearly there's an overlap on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you only had, and you knew that you only had 6 months to live, is there anything that you would go out and do or try?
I think I'm too old for it, but if I was to ask myself that question of what would I do if I knew I could not fail, I think I'd want to be a professional baseball player. And got to go to the Dodgers fantasy camp earlier this year, where you spend a whole week and they treat you like you're one of the players. And that was just the most amazing experience. And I was so sad to leave. That would be a good life to live for the last 6 months of my life.
So I got to ask, how'd you play when you were there?
I did okay. I played Little League probably 8 or 9 years of Little League. And when I got into high school, I was under 4 foot. No, under 5 foot, excuse me. I was 4'11". And so I was really small. I wasn't too fast. I had great hand-eye coordination, so I played really well until I got to high school, where, all the other guys started reaching puberty and I was a little bit behind. So I didn't make a good high school athlete, and I've always regretted that I didn't sprout up until, my senior year. And I've always wondered what if I just developed physically a little bit sooner.
No, I think that's interesting that you touch on that, because so many people, especially around the time now, the actual Little League World Series is going on TV and ESPN and ABC. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a cool comment, because you always wonder what had happened if you kept on your baseball career through high school. So that's pretty cool. But it's also cool that you went ahead and you got to go to the fantasy camp, because that's something that I've wanted to do in different sports, and they have quite a few in the basketball world, which is where I played in high school and college. So that's cool that you did that.
Highly recommended. It was amazing.
So one of the things we talk about is the concept of legacy, and I wanted to ask you, what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your legacy to be?
I've thought about that, because I don't know if I have any big giant ambitions around legacy, other than, I have a 7-year-old son. I had him a little bit later in life. And I would love my legacy to be, and I don't even know if it'll be able to be definable, but I'd love him to sidestep all of the hardship and pain that I've gone through. And I'm doing my best to make that happen the best way that I know how. So I want to raise a responsible and productive and contributing member of society.
That's such a cool definition of that word. And when you look at legacy, and I think way in which you worded it about having your son sidestep, and I think that's something that most parents understand, but most parents don't really want it to be their legacy. So I really think it's neat, because I think indirectly and directly we all want to have things differently. I don't want to say easier for our kids, but the reality, like you said, is just don't go through some of the things that we've gone through. So I'm glad you touched on that. And then last question before we let you go, and I wanted to ask if you have any parting words you'd like to leave for our listeners.
Yeah, so based on kind of the questions that you had asked me and where the direction our conversation went, it would be along the lines of, if there's something out there that you want and that you don't have it, I think the best advice that was ever given to me was just travel as far as you can see. And when you get there, you'll see further. You don't need to see the whole staircase to take that first step. And with each step, you become a little wiser, you get a little closer. And that's been a good philosophy that's served me up until this very day, probably for the last 30 years.
No, I think that's some great advice, and I know there's so many quotes that talk about you can always go farther, you can always see farther, you can always do more. So I think that's some great advice for our listeners. And then for our listeners that want to follow or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. No, I've got my own podcast, coincidentally. And so if you're listening to a podcast and you're a fan of podcasts, you can go to Epic Real Estate Investing. And if you just want to catch us online, we are at epicrealestate.com.
And what about you? Do you have your own type of social media following or website also?
Yeah, we're on Instagram at Epic Real Estate, but nothing personal. I guess my life is, or my business has kind of become my identity online, at least.
Well, listen, Matt, I truly appreciate your time. I think you shared some really neat things and definitely have some resources. So I would recommend to our listeners not only to connect with you via the social media, also your website, but also check out your real estate course, which is free, as well as any other ways that they want to connect with you on social media and or just find out a little bit more about real estate investing.
Sure. I appreciate it, Chris. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to episode number 151. As our theme of the day is starting over, that is exactly what Matt did. From bringing in over 7 figures in the music world, when that industry completely changed, Matt had to as well. However, when Matt was at his lowest, bagging groceries for $7 an hour, he had a mentor, his manager, that introduced him to real estate. What I like about Matt's story is that during those tough times, the only reason he became successful is because he took action. Matt's definition of accountability was spot on. He defined it as saying and declaring what you were going to do, and then going ahead and doing it. In his parting words, Matt shared the importance of going and traveling as far as you can, and then keep going. So in conclusion, I challenge each of you to keep going. Go as far as you can, push as hard as you can, and then go further. I was watching an interesting video a few weeks ago where the theme was that the mind gives up before the body does. As I personally can relate this to my workouts in the gym, I now see how this can relate to life in general. Whether it relates to you at work, in relationships, or in the gym, or with your personal and professional goals, keep going. Dream bigger. And as you are going for your greatness and your mind tells you to stop, don't. Keep going and take that extra step forward. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.